Okay, I'm joining again on my computer.
Okay.
All right, so I'll just use the video. So I'll just follow along with the video, and I'll use the audio through my cell. Then
Sounds good.
We are now live. Thank you for your patience.
All right, David, it looks like we have a quorum.
All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the good evening, all, and welcome to the February meeting of the Alexandria Transit Company Board of Directors. I'm David Kaplan, the board chair, and am going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. I am on my cell phone right now, and I don't have my camera on, but I'm here at home listening to the meeting. We'll see if my issues that I'm having here with my connection are resolved as the meeting goes on. But anxious to hear from all of our speakers and the discussion that we'll have tonight. We can go ahead and play the electronic meeting notice. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic emergency, this meeting of the Alexandria Transit Company Board of Directors is being held electronically pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3708.2A3, the Continuity of Government Ordinance adopted by the City Council on June 20th, 2020, or Section 4-0.01G in House Bill 29 and House Bill 30, enacted by the 2020 Virginia General Assembly, Virginia Acts of Assembly, Chapter 1283 and 1289, to undertake essential business. All the members of the board and staff are participating from remote locations through a Zoom meeting. This meeting is being held electronically unless a determination is made that it is safe enough to be held in person at the Alexandria Transit Company Boardroom, 3000 Business Center Drive, Alexandria, Virginia. Electronic access will be provided in either event. The meeting can be accessed by the public via Zoom and Facebook. Public comments may be made if participating via Zoom. The Zoom registration link is available on the Dash website, and requests for public comment can be made using the Q&A or chat feature. This meeting is being recorded. All right, we're going to move into our public comment section of the meeting. I'm told by staff that we have 4 speakers who have signed up. If there's anyone on the call, member of the public, who would like to be recognized during public comment, please make yourself known through the chat feature, and we'll recognize you after our 4 pre-registered speakers. Go ahead and call the first speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first 2 speakers that we have signed up for this evening are Liz Kane and William Feister, in that order.
And before our first speaker starts talking, I see as staff has brought up the handy dandy timer. There's a 3-minute limit for all speakers. If you have additional comments that go beyond 3 minutes, we invite you to submit through the to the board secretary and staff, and they will make sure that your comments in full are distributed to the board. Just go ahead and keep an eye on that timer so you'll know when your 3 minutes are approaching.
Great, and this is Liz King. I think you can all hear me.
We can hear you.
Great. All right, well, thank you all so much for the opportunity to speak. And I just want to thank all of you all for your work. I understand that you all have some really difficult decisions this year, given this year's budget situation. So I'm a permanent resident here at Virginia Theological Seminary, but today I'm just speaking as an Alexandria resident, not representing the institute. I used to be an AT2 rider before the pandemic, and I really hope to take the bus to the VRE to work again. I'm now a MacArthur parent to drop my kids off there, but I really want to come speak today about those riders I know that don't have the kind of privilege and flexibility that I do around remote working or being able to drive if you all have to cut the bus line. Especially as I know, I think some of the ridership data that you have isn't always able to capture where riders get off. So I just want to highlight a few folks that I know here that depend on the bus for their jobs that come to this area. They take the AT2 here to jobs at the seminary here, particularly daycare and food service employees. There's a number of folks who come to work at the Bethel Daycare, St. Stephen St. Agnes High School, Episcopal High School, and a lot of these employees are lower income and largely people of color. And I also just want to note that Virginia Theological Seminary is a living wage employer. When I also rode the bus, before COVID, I witnessed a lot of riders who disembarked for work at MacArthur, at King Street, walking towards the long-term care facility. And also just highlight that the student population here at the seminary has increasingly grown older, more economically fragile, and racially diverse as a result of increased tuition assistance available. And many of the student spouses that come here find part and full-time jobs in the community and rely on the bus to commute to work. So I just want to come and highlight those demographics for you today. I realize there's some really tough decisions, and just ask that if you all find you have to limit or change our bus access, that you tag it for the future, that when we have the funds to reinstate it, that it's a bus service that is valued by the dashboard as a connection point for those folks in need for jobs they rely on. And thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker.
This is Bill Pfister. Am I coming through okay?
We can hear you, Bill.
Great, thank you. Good evening. Thank you for your service on behalf of our community, and thank you for the opportunity to share comments here. So as I mentioned, I am Bill Pfister. I'm an Alexandria resident, and up till about a year ago, I had been a regular AT2 rider for over 7 years. I'm also the past president of the Douglas MacArthur PTA. My comments tonight are my own, but I just mentioned this so that you're aware of my familiarity with the school community and the surrounding area along Janney's Lane. So my primary request is that you maintain dash service for Janney's Lane and the east end of Seminary Road, the AT2, N12, whichever you want to call it. While this area may have a relatively lower density of riders, the riders are diverse, as you heard Liz just talk about, and it includes residents young and old, and the communities and staff associated with a large number of schools, daycares, and places of worship along this corridor. I understand the economic toll of the current pandemic, and I appreciate that you'll have to make some difficult decisions that may include ending service to this corridor. When there were budget concerns a little more than a year ago, several of us spoke with ATC board and several Dash employees. We plan to work together to improve ridership on the route, revisit the issue at some point in the future. And I believe that was a 2-year window we were looking at. But then COVID happened, and transit and commuting changed pretty quickly, pretty drastically. I've been working from home, haven't touched Metro or Dash since last March. While I plan to use both again, probably won't be for at least several months. So it's going to be a little ways off. While I prefer that you maintain service to the corridor, I also understand that you have a fiduciary responsibility. If you decide to eliminate the service now, I would ask that you reconsider coming back to this and maybe for a 2-year window in the future, potentially a trial period to evaluate and increase ridership. So the Douglas MacArthur School building on Janney's Lane will be demolished in the coming weeks, with a new building planned to reopen in January of 2023. Although that time is a ways off, it may be a good time to revisit this route for an assessment period. So in short, I'm asking first, if you can preserve it, that would be awesome. But if not, understand that. But please do consider an assessment period in the future so that we can work together to try and increase ridership and encourage greater transit use. So thank you again for your continued service, and have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. I understand we have additional speakers.
Yes, we also have Hap Connors who signed up, but I don't believe that they have joined the meeting as of yet. So we will move forward with Tony Williams, followed by Michael DeLisso.
All right. Tony, are you on the call? Tony? Is Michael on the call?
Chairman Kaplan, can you hear me?
I can. Are you Tony or Michael?
Michael.
Michael, hi, welcome.
Hi, good evening. I guess I should start.
Yes, please.
Good evening, Chairman Kaplan and members of the ATC board. My name is Mike DeLiso and I represent Park Place Condominium. We've engaged the ATV Stakeholder Working Group, ATC, and City Council, urging restoration of all-day bus service to Van Dorn Street. And we sent you another letter last night detailing this need. The ATV met our needs with the N10 route, which is now abandoned in the new Dash network. We are disappointed with the proposed line 36, which abandons the density of Van Dorn Street, instead serving Early Street. Routing along our stretch of Van Dorn provides better ridership and equitable access. A route shifter split that serves Van Dorn provides great community benefit and minimal harm. Service to our community is essential. Park Place and 4600 Duke are the only two high rises in the entirety of the Seminary Hill, Strawberry Hill small area plan. Park Place's 399 households need and want transit at our doorsteps. We're market affordable and also have 38 units owned by ARHA. Our stair-free living is necessary for many senior citizens and persons with disabilities like myself. At least 65 households are car-free and 167 households are car light. Our 3 medical offices, daycare, association staff, and neighbors all need transit. Historically, our stop had all-day service. In 2015, WMATA cut the 25 lines and our stop reduced the commuter service. Since then, 2,000 feet with a grade are between us and weekend and all-day bus service. For our neighbors, the impact of splitting or shifting service from Early to Van Dorn is minimal. At the waypoint, the on-site King Street Service Road stop is only 150 yards walking distance and provides better service than Minokin. Braddock Lee's 13 apartments building are split in half amongst the 2 alignments, making routing choice a wash. But the benefits of serving Van Dorn compared to Early are clear. On Early, you turn through unsignaled intersections, travel on a residential road without a double yellow line, and serve 101 single-family homes. But take Van Dorn, and you get our businesses and 399 households, ARHA's townhomes on Braddock, and several buildings of the Encore apartments. You achieve the goal of greater ridership, and you also get equitable access, serving many low-income residents, minority residents, senior citizens, and persons with disabilities. In conclusion, Van Dorn needs service, and the abandoned N10 routes serve this need. We request that the Line 36 Proposal 1 either shift alignment from Early to Van Dorn, or 2, use split routing around Fort Ward Park. We can't imagine a better use of an I-395 commuter choice grant than to serve our density corridor, which abuts and is impacted by the freeway. It's the right thing to do for the whole neighborhood, and it's the right thing to do for Dash's leadership and equitable access. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I do want to confirm we got your letter earlier today, was distributed to board members, and we will be discussing, I think, relevant to our speakers about the 82 Janney Seminary. We're going to be having a presentation on what the potential a cost-neutral transit vision or route network, now that we're kind of past the visioning, will look like, if that is in fact how we are told to proceed by the city in terms of funding. And certainly staff will be addressing the changes that would be made if we went ahead with the alignment where we would not have the 10 and 11 routes. And we'll be having some discussion about that later in the meeting.
Well, thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. I did see another speaker, someone, at least one other person had identified wanting to speak in the chat.
Yes, Stephen Aporta did request to speak as well, and he should be able to speak now.
All right. Are you with us, Stephen?
Yes. Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'd like to echo the sentiments. I'm also a resident at 2500 North Van Dorn Street, and I have traveled the public system extensively, including the routes that are proposed to be discontinued. My overall thoughts is I echo the sentiments of Mr. DeLiso and his very thorough follow-up of this matter. What I would say in a macro sense is that we have to consider public transportation for all those people that will be commuting in a future environment beyond the COVID pandemic, and for all the people that are using it today, our traffic density and our traffic issues will continue to get worse. We know this because those are the trends. These are the type of public services that we need to be able to transport to and from, rather than take our own transportation, for those that can afford it, and for those that can actually swing that possibility. So I urge you to take some sort of fair and equitable decision to allow people to have accessible options for public transportation, such as those folks voicing their opinions here in this meeting, and all the neighbors that have used successfully these public access modes of transportation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any additional speakers?
Mr. Chairman, we'll give Whitney a moment. We may want to try Mr. Williams again, who seemed to be having audio issues. And Whitney, our chairman is just asking if you have additional speakers. I noticed there was one trying to connect in the chat.
Yes, the link to join the webinar has been sent to him. If he's not able to connect before we move on, I'll follow up with him to see if I can get his comments in writing.
Okay, well, let's do this. If you are able to get in touch with him after we finish item number 3, so which would be the board reports and TNS report, just interject at that point before we move on to Josh if he is on the call, and we'll recognize him at that point.
Yes, sir. And it looks like Tony Williams has been asked to be removed from the list. It was a mistake.
Oh, okay. All righty. All right, we'll go ahead and close the public comment. Thank you to all who spoke. And this is the kind of engagement that we need to have, this kind of feedback, both for our staff as they're preparing recommendations and for us as we move forward and come up with a solution that allows us to live within the confines of what these cities' fiscal situation is at this time. And we're beginning kind of a months-long engagement process on this that we'll go through this spring. We're going to move on to the meeting minutes, which were included in our packet for January 13th. Are there any amendments or changes to the minutes as they were presented? If not, could I get a motion to approve them?
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the minutes from our January 2021 meeting.
Moved by Matt.
I second. It's Jim.
Seconded by Jim. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, passes unanimously. So we're going to move on to item 3, which are the reports. And oh, good, you guys, the staff made a slide of the little icebreaker exercise we're going to do, and I'm just trying on my computer to bring up the order that I had set for how we would go about doing the exercise. But while before we do that, let me just say that we report that we had the stockholders meeting with our city council last night. I know many of you were able to join us on the call, and I appreciate you making time to do that. The meeting included all of us being reappointed to the board for a new 1-year term, and I appreciate all of your willingness to continue to serve on this board and to be engaged. And I think there was a very good presentation by Josh highlighting some of the not only how Dash has coped with COVID and supported our riders and our workforce, but also some accolades that we've received, the grant funding related to I-395 and the success of enhanced service on the AT1 and AT9, and also highlighting some recognition to Kristen Cunningham, as Josh had reported our meeting last month, in our planning department had received an award from the Virginia Transit Association. And I'm glad that we were able to share that with City Council. And we did have a question from the mayor as to how we would be proceeding with a cost neutral transit network, and understanding particularly some of the impacts on commuter service as a result of that. And so we'll go ahead and do the that's all I had for the, well, actually one other item for the chair's report. I mentioned this last month that we would need to appoint a nominating committee to basically, when the board has its stockholders meeting, the next order of business in reorganizing the board is to appoint officers of the board and the corporation. And so we need a nominating committee consisting of either 2 or 3 board members to basically go through the list and to recommend a slate. The officers of the corporation, when we had done our last bylaws change, most of those are specified that whoever occupies this position, mostly with Dash, then serves in this as this officer of the corporation. But we do need to pick a chair and a vice chair for the board for the coming year. So I'm going to ask that next month we place on the agenda the appointment of a nominating committee. And as I said, we'll need 2 or 3 members. If you are interested in doing that, to please let me know either before or when we call the agenda item next month. And if not, then I will, we have a saying in the Commission on Aging called "we voluntold you to do things," and I will voluntold a couple of folks to serve in that role. And then in April to come back and present to the board the slate so we can vote on the officers for the following year. Again, this isn't a very heavy lift. It's something you would do over Zoom. We'd schedule through staff, and you would just go through the roster. And mostly it's just determining who will be the chair and vice chair of the board.
Mr. Chair, I'll volunteer to be on.
Oh, excellent. Do we have a second volunteer? Then we.
Looks like Larry.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not able to, on my cell phone, I'm not able to see the gallery view. So thank you, Larry, for volunteering. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So I guess let's follow up with the 2 of you, and then we might be able even to expedite and have this reported out in March. So I'll talk with Josh, and then either he or I will be in touch, and then you 2 may be able to do this next month since we actually have the committee established now. And thank you for volunteering. So we'll move on to the icebreaker exercise. I just wanted to do something fun, and I regret that with my issues I'm having tonight that you're not able to see me, because I certainly am happy to see all of you in the little squares as they pop up as folks speak. But just for us to get to know each other a little better and to recognize that it's been so long since we've seen one another, and some of you have never sat in a room with us as a group because of when you joined the board. And I just thought this would be kind of a fun way to kind of get the ball rolling. So hopefully you all saw the email I sent out on Sunday with the 2 questions, and they're printed here. And I decided to break us down into 2 groups just so we can continue moving on and with the business of the meeting. So tonight we'll hear from me, we'll hear from Jim, Ian, Linda, Brandy, and Josh. And appreciate your willingness to share. So I'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to answer question 1, the activity or tradition I've begun since the pandemic that brings me joy. And so just as background, I'm a big fan of the Peanuts comic strip and all in the 80s and 70s and 80s when they made all those wonderful cartoons. And there's one, Charlie Brown's Thanksgiving, where I think Peppermint Patty basically volunteers him to cook a Thanksgiving feast. But Charlie Brown can't cook at all. And I remember in that show, I think he ends up bringing 3 things. He brings Tootsie Rolls, he brings popcorn, and he enlists Snoopy and Woodstock to basically toast up a couple of loaves of bread, and they spread butter on it, and that's what they serve at the table. And Peppermint Patty is so furious because she was expecting turkey and stuffing and mashed potatoes, but Charlie Brown doesn't know how to cook. I wasn't quite that bad, but I was pretty lacking in my cooking skills. And so I had asked for the holidays a couple of years ago for a cookbook called How to Cook Everything, The Basics. It's by Mark Bittman, who cooks, and I think he's a very famous chef, but he, I think, has a cooking blog at the New York Times. And this cookbook is wonderful because it has over 100 recipes, and it has all these pictures, and it has little tutorials with lots and lots of very specific directions on how to do certain skills, like how to even, cut onions, how to saute, what's the difference between sauteing and simmering, what type of knives to use for things. And so I have spent a good part of my pandemic cooking my way through this cookbook, and I have done, I think there's about 120 recipes, and I counted up last night. I'd done 44 of them, so I'm pretty proud of that. I can't say everything has been a great success, but it's especially when I practice things over and over again, they do seem to get better, and it's been fun to experiment with a lot of different ingredients, and they have a lot of different variations here. So I've been very proud of that, and I hope when we do get back together in person that I will commit to baking something from this cookbook. They have a good good oatmeal cookie recipe, and I will bring cookies so you can all sample my baking skills. So that's mine. We'll go on to Jim.
David, I'm curious, do you deliver?
Do I deliver? Well, you could be my taste tester, Larry, because I have to make sure, because I probably put up with some mediocre food. But yeah, no, we'll figure something out there. But I'm not quite ready for Together We Bake has nothing to worry about me. All right, Jim, you're up.
Very hard to choose between these two questions. But I'll go with two, and maybe if people want to know one another time, I'll tell them. So I grew up outside of New York City in the suburbs, right outside Queens. And so public transit was just like, it was part of life as a child. But if I think back to the kind of memories of being a kid that kind of stick with me, they all have a connection to transit, but particularly in my case, the train, which is, I grew up being a big Mets fan, and when the Mets won the World Series, sorry for Nats fans, I am now a Nats fan as well. I haven't given up all my New York allegiances. I took the train with my dad to Shea Stadium, right, to the playoffs, and saw the Mets beat Nolan Ryan, right, who was the pitcher for the Houston Astros at the time. The best movie I ever saw, at least still to this date, my dad took us all on Christmas one year down to the old Ziegfeld Theater. Anyone knows is no longer there. It was this enormous theater to see Lawrence of Arabia. And we took Long Island Railroad right downtown to go see that. And it was cold, and you get off and you have to like walk a few blocks in New York, and that's not the best part of it, but it was a train that got me there. Another experience is, there was a July 4th celebration every year in New York, and my parents took me and a friend on the train and then on the subway downtown to South Street Seaport to watch the fireworks. And as a little kid, that was a really big deal. I remember just being crunched, right, and surrounded by so many the masses of people, which on the one hand was a invigorating experience, but also maybe a little bit scary and off-putting as a little kid. So both a positive and negative experience, but it was just such a big part of, I guess, growing up for me and transit. And I can't really imagine having grown up in, without it, because it's what took me to all these amazing experiences that I had as a child. So that's my answer to number two.
Well, thanks, Jim. And see, this is great. I grew up in Nassau County. I had no idea you were from
Me too.
Queens.
No, I grew up in Nassau County, first suburb out of Queens. So there you go.
Yeah, I rode the Long Island Railroad many times. In fact, my first job even was in the city. But as a kid, yeah, I spent a lot of time on that railroad. So Hicksville was my station.
All right. Yeah, I know Hicksville.
All right, we'll go ahead with Ian next.
Okay. My memory is not as exciting as the two of you, but I'll go with number two. And it's an early memory of using mass transit in high school, the bus. That was my mode of transportation going home. If I think back prior to high school, there is a vague memory of being on the train, riding the train with my parents. Nevertheless, I could remember how, I would take the bus schedule for granted, that it would always be there, it would be always on time, regardless of the weather. At that age, you never thought of any other conditions. And, in later years, when I get to understand what it takes to make that happen, scheduling, staffing, funding, and now as a board member, just to tie in the last part of this question, it even makes me more committed to wanting to make this experience on the bus a more pleasant experience, as well as a dependable mode of transportation for the patrons. I think more than ever, I would like the experience to be pleasant. And I could definitely vouch for Dash Dash service, not to plug anything, but I have to say, when the first time I rode Dash, I was pleasantly surprised, as opposed to other services I'd used in the past. So that would be my memory.
And Ian, I may have missed this. Where did you grow up?
Oh, Trinidad.
Trinidad. Okay, great. Thank you for sharing. All right, we'll move on to I think it's Linda next.
Hi all. Sorry, I'm on my phone temporarily. I should be able to switch shortly. But I'm pleased to be part of this. Sorry, my cat's here also. I'm going to choose the pandemic activity. Since the pandemic began, we were already members of the YMCA down the street here. We hadn't used the pool very much, and they made it possible for members to use the pool by just reserving a lane during the pandemic. And that's become one of our kind of prime weekend activities with the kids. And I'm happy to say one of the kids has learned to swim in that time just because we've been going swimming so much. And the other one's working on it. And it's just been really nice to kind of be able to engage a little bit in the community, even though it's very difficult during pandemic. And also just to get some activity somewhere else kind of and be moving around. So that's been really fun and just been a change of pace for us.
That's nice. Thank you. Thank you. All right, Brandy.
Who did you have next, David?
Brandy would be next.
Brandy is not on the meeting today.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll move her into March. And so I guess, Josh, you're up.
Okay. I'm going to choose number 2. Surprise, surprise. It would be the appropriate story to tell relative to my career. But I grew up in this region. I actually grew up in the DC and Baltimore area, and remember riding transit very much in this area, going to New York to you New Yorkers to visit family and enjoying riding the train and whatnot. But I didn't pay much attention to it at that point. I went to college thinking that I was going to be in computer science, and was in my freshman year of school. And I rode the local transit at the university to go to one of my classes. Of course, I was terrified. And wasn't quite sure how I felt about the whole experience and whatnot. Well, it turned out to be a really pleasant experience. In fact, the day that I decided to learn how to drive a bus is the day that I got on a busy bus with a very friendly driver who sort of, it was all students, a lot of freshmen. So he kind of joked with us and got us sort of singing and yelling and just kind of made the ride fun. And I looked up on the wall of the bus and saw a sign that said they were hiring drivers. And so I thought, why not try? Especially considering that I was so terrified of driving a bus. I thought that I would hit everything, and I never understood how drivers managed to take turns and not run everyone over. So I applied for the job, got the job, ended up deciding that I was not a computer science person by any stretch of the imagination, switched careers, and here I am. But the interesting thing, all of that story is that the day that I rode the bus, the person who was driving just so happened to be the general manager of the transit system. And he was driving because they were very short on help, as often was the case, especially in the beginning of the semester, because they relied heavily on students and constantly had turnover of employees. So when I got on board, I told him the story of how I became involved in transit and riding because it was such a positive experience, and his energy, and ultimately it has become my career.
That's great. Thank you. Now, have you driven a bus since you've been at Dash, Josh?
I have, actually. I still have my commercial license. I have, over the years, maintained it. I used to drive a lot in rodeos. I was a rodeo champion. In fact, one of our road supervisors, who now works on our team, competed against me many, many years ago when I was a driver.
Hmm.
He could correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe I placed higher than him in one of the rodeos. I'm not entirely sure. So I took him out in the bus and drove around and impressed him with my driving skills. And it had nothing to do with the fact that I was general manager, that he was complimentary of my driving. It was entirely because I'm a good driver.
Well, I have to say, Raymond Mui is one of the best drivers, because he would help out when Dash was short some years ago, and I had the pleasure of riding on a bus he was driving a couple of times, and he was very good.
Get on a ride with Tristan one day. Tristan is quite our winner of our unsung hero. He certainly gets the buses excited and loves to make his announcements.
Yeah, he actually is the only one of your operators I know who still, I don't know if he still does this, but he wears the hat. The bus driver hat.
He's in
always
planning, but he puts his hat on when he goes out to drive, that's for sure.
Yeah, it always makes me chuckle. So. All right, well, thank you all for participating this time, and we'll have the rest of the group presenting in March. And these are some great stories, and I'm glad we had an opportunity to do that. We'll go ahead and move on to the TNS Director's Report. And I think Hillary has begun her maternity leave, so I believe is one of her division chiefs presenting.
Yes, hi, that's me. I'm Christopher Zeman.
Oh, hi, Chris. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Again, I'm sitting in for Hillary Orr. I already know a lot of you from the Transportation Commission and from other areas, so hello, nice to see you guys. Yeah, just real quick, the TNES report, the WMATA budget has been saved essentially by the CARES 2 Act. The region is receiving $714 million. And most of that will go to WMATA, and then a portion of that will be divvied up between local jurisdictions. So the city expects to receive about $5 million from this. WMATA is going, just so everybody knows, I'm sure you've heard before, but WMATA is going to use this to restore most of their service for the rest of FY21 and the first half of FY22. And then if no additional funds are provided, there will be severe WMATA cuts starting in January 2022. Next slide. Yeah. And then some of you may have heard already, but the city applied for Smart Scale funding in the fall. Smart Scale is a state program run by VDOT for larger capital projects. So the city submitted 4 applications, and VDOT staff recently came out with their recommendations to the Commonwealth Transportation Board. And based on their scoring, they recommended all 4 of our projects for funding, which is great news, wonderful news for us. The projects you can see there, they all come from different studies. And the 2 big ones related to transit are the Landmark Mall Transit Center, obviously where the West End Transway and the Duke Street Transway and several local and WMATA bus routes meet. And then the Upper King Street Multimodal Reconstruction, which we're actually renaming the King Street Bradley Multimodal Reconstruction, just so people know, don't confuse it with other Upper King Street projects. So in that, we will be starting the planning for that hopefully this fall with some CMAQ funds, but that should hopefully have a strong transit component to the design as well. So between now and the actual decision, there are several rounds of CTB review and then public input in April and May. So yeah, with a final decision in June. Does anybody have any questions? All right.
Thanks, Chris.
That's the end of your report, Chris?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll have other board member announcements and reports. Does anyone else want to report on a organization or board that they're part of, or anything relevant to our work?
Yeah, just really quick. It's Jeff Bennett here. So As some of you know, my job at DC Department of Transportation, we manage an electric fleet, and we're working to replace our entire fleet with all electric vehicles. So recently we entered discussions with DC Infrastructure Academy, which is the trade up here in the district. And so we reached out to several regional transportation agencies. We're trying to partner with them on a trade curriculum for training, I guess, electric mechanics and technicians. And I know, Raymond, I still owe you a response to your email, but I guess my point in mentioning this is if anybody's interested in becoming part of this or contributing feedback to this program, just feel free to reach out to me. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. Anyone else? All right, if not, we'll go ahead and move into the general manager's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a brief moment here to get to my report. So my report begins on page 7 of your packet, and I have some slides here that I will use as I discuss what we've had going on at Dash. It has been an active month for us with lots of changes. The most notable thing that's been going on is with the new administration in place, we have finally gotten federal support for the enforcement of passengers wearing masks while using modes of transit. And the order that was placed became effective Monday, February the 1st, through the executive order signed by the president to promote COVID-19 safety in domestic and international travel. Some of the requirements that we have are shown here on the screen, but effectively it means that we as a transit provider are responsible for enforcing the expectations of the order. I'm going to go ahead and ask Stephanie Salzone, who is our Director of Safety and Security and has been our lead for the entirety of the pandemic in responding to COVID and providing recommendations, speaking with the health department, and following both local, state, and federal guidelines related to the pandemic, to elaborate just a little bit on what Dash has been doing and some of the things that we have in place in an effort to support, follow, and enforce this, this order. So Stephanie, I welcome you to speak.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. So to elaborate on the previous slide, there were some items listed that we are to comply with under the order. Those are minimum requirements that are defined in the order. So we have established an internal policy that we're finalizing to cover these minimum requirements, but simply put, in the event that a passenger does not comply with the federal law, we are required to tell them to do so, provide them a mask that we do have on board. That's something we're going to do above and beyond. And then additionally, disembark the passenger or deny boarding if necessary. Now, this was placed on us rather quickly. We were notified verbally on January 28th, and it launched officially 3 days later. So we did take an additional week, which went through Monday, February 8th, to notify the ridership and the public that we would begin enforcing on the 8th. I would be happy to take any questions that you have regarding this, or if I can elaborate on any details as well.
I have one quick question. There was notification that people should be wearing masks, so this shouldn't have been a huge surprise for the patrons.
Yes, I think something I would like to emphasize that I failed to do was that there's not much change here, especially from the perspective of our operators. That definitely was one of our largest concerns, was their safety during this transition from asking for compliance and then enforcing it. So we have been communicating for months and months now that masks are required. It has been something that's been required at the state level and local level. But with this federal law, the only change when it comes to enforcement is us simply not providing the service. So we're not asking our workforce to remove passengers or engage any more so than reminding them of what the law is and waiting for assistance from the police department and their supervision.
Okay.
Stephanie, it's David. I had shared with Josh, one of the I've observed, and this is pre-COVID, that sometimes disputes can occur because passengers feel that a bus is being unduly delayed. In the past, that would often be because of a dispute with a passenger boarding about fares, and that a passenger who is already seated on the bus is angry that the operator stopped operating the bus in order to address this. And I actually saw once an incident that really I think came very close to becoming physical. The passenger was so upset about the delay. So how are we looking at that from a safety standpoint in terms of dealing with our customer expectations that they're on a bus and that the bus is going to make an effort to keep schedule while we're sort of then having to stop the bus and wait. Sort of how are we dealing with this for the folks who are in compliance, who are upset that the bus is not moving?
Sure. So I would emphasize that the goal ultimately is for our passengers to be able to use our service by complying by wearing the mask, which is why we did take the additional week to continue our messaging and provide a heads up, if you will, that this was coming. We do as well, we're offering de-escalation training with our workforce. We're finishing that now to do one-on-one with our staff. They get de-escalation training as it is, but we're doing a targeted module that's specifically to deal with this type of situation. Also, as it relates to the passengers that I can totally understand would be upset that the bus is being held up, I will say that the directive is clear as to us not being able to continue in service with them. But what I can say is that we do still have our standby vehicles, and we've discussed at length, should a passenger, if we get into what I would say is maybe a who's going to move first situation where someone just does not want to exit, we do have additional vehicles daily on standby that we would essentially dispatch to that location if we felt it was going to take a significant amount of time to remove the individual. So I do understand how there could be a significant concern as far as delaying the trip, but we do have some options should it begin to take a few minutes longer than we would anticipate to remove that individual to get them where they need to go.
Thank you. That's helpful. And second question is about what have the conversations with the police department about this? How have they gone, and what support are you receiving?
Sure. So we do have their full support. We did communicate mostly in writing. There was a few staff members that did speak with the police department. We do know the chief of police did state that they received our information and they're fully supportive of helping us to enforce this situation. And again, we're not asking our operators to do anything different than they have been as far as informing the passengers of what the expectations are. And our supervisor staff in the police department are ready to support them in the event that they have to enforce the federal law.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Stephanie. I appreciate you joining us to elaborate on some of the efforts that we've had in place related to this order. I would also just point out to board members, the information that's displayed here on the PowerPoint is a list of the various ways in which we are communicating with our passengers, and we are endeavoring to make sure that everyone understands this requirement. We have notably been updating the decals on the exterior of the bus, and those have always been on the front and rear doors so that when we do switch to front door boarding, they will still be visible to the passengers as they board. So the other good news I would share is that in conversations with our director of operations, there really have not been issues. We have had some issues since the start of the pandemic. Typically, they are with sort of the same passengers. And that's not uncommon in transit. Oftentimes in transit, if you have a fare dispute, it's not the first time you've had a fare dispute with that passenger. If you have a mask dispute, it's not the first time you've had a mask dispute with that passenger. Hopefully we've been able to get the message across, and the passengers who were early on maybe resistant to this have understood the change. So that may be an indicator of the fact that we've had less issues. Further, we've also had notably less complaints from our passengers. Joseph, our office manager, monitors those and reported just today that complaints have been down in the past month or so in general, and we haven't heard any specific to this. Want to highlight another program here that Dash has been working on. We have for a while been in partnership with the city working to implement transit signal priority in the city. The program is funded through NVTA and has largely been driven by the city. This is the installation of technology at various intersections throughout Alexandria, as well as equipment that is installed on the buses to communicate with the intersections, to let the traffic signal controller know that the bus is attempting to get through, hopefully to extend the light green or to shorten the red light. This differs from a police vehicle or an ambulance in that a bus doesn't trigger a change of a signal. The TSP will simply enable us to move through the intersection with more efficiency. So there are 28 intersections completed, 18 on Duke Street, 10 on King Street. A further 54 intersections are to be installed by 2026, with another 10 completed by the end of this year. About half the fleet has been equipped with the transmitter technology. And this is a really great program because there's an opportunity here for significant improvement in schedule adherence, especially when we have more traffic issues. Traffic has come back. It is not as bad as pre-pandemic, but it certainly is back, especially on our major corridors. And so we're excited to see how this will continue to benefit the city and our riders. So we're very excited about that, and we appreciate the partnership with the city and the hard work that staff have done. And we were able to join them in some remarks, and they, the mayor and the chair of NVTA, as well as myself and Jan Lambert, were able to join them for a little virtual ribbon cutting type event. And when that's live and posted, we'll be certain to share that with you so you can take a look at the remarks. The last two items here on my report is one is just a teaser just to alert you to the fact that come the March meeting, we anticipate presenting a policy for you to consider that will be determining how our advertising program is to be governed on our fleet. You will recall that one of the budgetary requirements and commitments that we made in submission of this year's budget was to go ahead and implement exterior bus advertising. This has been something that Dash has never done since the day it started. We have long held out in the effort to continue to maintain the appearance of our fleet, to avoid issues, potential issues with advertisers, and generally to maintain a high quality appearance that we have been known for. With that said, we understand the fiscal situation now, and we see the importance of moving forward. The policy will very clearly and very concisely ensure that what ads are put on the buses, where and how, and the expectations of maintaining them and their appearance are to the highest possible standards. So the team is currently drafting that. We will run it to Lonnie Rich in advance of presenting it to you. And then we will ask for you to take a look and then to adopt that policy. This board generally is not involved with operational policies at Dash, which is why you rarely see something like this come forward. But because this is a high profile, externally facing, on the buses kind of thing, it's important that the board be the authorizing agent on this policy. So certainly we have time to get this done, and we'll be happy to receive your comments, discuss in March. And if you're not ready to move forward in March, that will be fine. We can certainly take it back up in April, just as long as we finalize it in advance of our July 1 launch when we plan to get going.
So Josh, excuse me, I think you answered the question in my mind, that the requirements would be very specific so no one can feel discriminated that their ad was not accepted. I'm taking that as a yes, that it will be very specific, right?
Yeah, and we're gonna try to make sure we define as much as possible, you know, in the policy, so there is not these gray areas.
Okay.
No.
Sorry, and I'm looking at the consideration statement. The only thing I want to be clear on is what data we'll be looking at that suggests to us that, you know, there is progress enough, because this is like in 2.5 weeks at the nearest. What data specifically, if you can discuss that now, that we will be looking at to determine that, you know, that we are ready to accept fair collection?
Oh, yes, thank you for that question. I'm sorry, I hadn't quite gotten into that.
Oh,
but
sorry.
Good segue. Yes, you are. Your keen eye has picked up on the fact that this is an action item that I put out there. So related to the driver barriers, to your point, Ian, we are about halfway there, and you are correct that March is right around the corner. My intent here is, at the pace we've been moving, and I want to commend, I don't know whether he's on here listening with the virtual format, John Lanoka is not able to be on the panel as he normally would be in the audience at the meetings, as you recall, in person. But he has worked very hard with his team, and I'm very proud of them and thankful to them for actually taking on this project in-house. We, of course, had to solicit and secure the parts and the equipment and get the training. But since doing that, we've actually been successful in moving forward very quickly in installing these barriers in-house. So again, the recommendation that I'm putting forward is for you to consider moving to reinstate fares with a date of March 1, which is really the goal. But candidly, as you mentioned, we're not far from that. So I want to make sure that it's clear that the reinstatement would be dependent upon the time and period at which we have completed enough barriers to ensure that the vehicles that go out in revenue service are equipped with a barrier. Now, we tend to avoid taking action when we don't have 100% of our fleet compatible with whatever the action is. So because we can never guarantee what buses are available, what buses are in service, what buses are out for maintenance, and those kinds of things. So this is a very, I think this is a very granular level decision that I want my team to make from an operations and maintenance perspective. And I want to make sure that they understand and have evaluated when we're ready to do that. But my recommendation was that we go ahead and get it in place to be able to move forward when we're ready, and not need to necessarily wait on the March 10th board meeting. It is very possible, though, that we would not be ready until after that meeting. So I saw Matt's hand go up, and then Jim.
Yeah, Josh, thank you. Well, I think part of this with the barrier, or in lieu of a barrier, is how are the vaccinations coming along? And by March 1, will most of the drivers be vaccinated?
So that's a very good question. I'm assuming Stephanie may still be on here. I see her coming off of mute. Come to my rescue, Stephanie. But Matt, it's a good question. I will say that on a high level, the resistance to the vaccines has significantly dropped. So that's the good news. Now the question of getting people in for the vaccine, Stephanie can help answer. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I definitely would say that, you know, when we did the survey back in the fall, we were looking at more than half that were either not interested or we're not sure. I definitely think we've crossed the half line. I think we have more than half now that are interested or trying to get a vaccine. So we're still working very hard to accomplish that. But there was something specific that I wanted to address. The barriers that are being installed are a state directive as far as compliance. So the permanent standard that was released by Governor Northam requires us to install plastic barriers where reasonable. And because driver barriers are a reasonable accommodation, even if we had 100% of our employees vaccinated, we're still required by the state to have this barrier installed.
So my question sort of was more towards the risk to the driver, not as much as the mandate, but I get it. Thank you.
Matt, was your question also just generally how many people do we believe have been able to get their first shot?
Well, you know, I think, yeah, I guess. I mean, I know there's resistance, and I'm glad to hear that the resistance is waning. And I hope you guys were able to connect with Natalie Tallis.
Yes, I've had many conversations with Natalie specifically,
Good.
along with other members of the Virginia Department of Health. So we're definitely headed in the right direction. We're working on methods to figure out exactly how many are vaccinated because it's not a requirement. So we're asking for voluntary disclosure on that. But I think we're going the right way with getting them vaccinated.
Super. Thank you.
All right, Jim.
Thanks, Josh. I guess my question for you, this is a great and helpful update. What is there a reason why the action recommended has the date of March 1 and is not just articulated in a way that's based off of, you know, the results kind of being where you want them to be? Meaning enough barriers are up and you feel comfortable and there's enough public notice. I'm okay with this, but why not just make it outcome oriented and based, and therefore it gives you the ability to put in place the fares when you've hit whatever those metrics are.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I think you've got a good point. I don't know that that's really a critical component of this. We generally like to try to set a goal. And generally when we recommend an action, we would aim for a goal and then sort of ask to have a condition that drives whether or not that goal is obtained. I'm totally fine with and appreciate your comment that a more general, as soon as it's possible, be the case. This is just simply a suggestion. But again, you know, we have about 3/4 of the barriers in-house. So if the team continues as they are, it's going to come down to more of an operational question of can we get service on the road at the levels that's needed with potentially up to 1/4 of the fleet unavailable. And that's a little heavier of a lift. And so that's probably another part of that consideration.
Okay, listen, if the goal is helpful for you and the team to have that there, I would support this as written, but I also think it's potentially not necessary. And as long as the metrics that need to be met are met and you're clear on what those are, I think that would also suffice. But I would defer to you then on this from my perspective.
Thank you. Thank you. Larry's hand is up.
Thanks, Josh. Just a suggestion around, improving numbers in the workforce getting the vaccine as it becomes more available. Some organizations are taking the step of offering administrative leave to go and get that shot and go get that vaccine. I don't know if that's something that Dash has considered or would be available, but just something to consider as vaccines do start to roll out in higher numbers.
Thank you. That's a really good point. In fact, I would share that we have actually indicated that staff should take the first available appointment regardless of their work schedule. And if it does interfere with their work, we will facilitate getting a substitute driver for the duration of the time that's required for them to leave and go over and take the shot. So we would theoretically go out with a company vehicle, the driver would meet them, they give them the company vehicle where they would drive straight to the vaccination site, complete the vaccination, wait their time period and then return.
That's outstanding. Thanks, Josh.
Jeff.
Yeah, so if we choose to move forward with the recommendation, just curious, as far as the messaging, would that come out tomorrow to the passengers, or when would you all look to get that out there?
So good question. We would hold off on activating messaging until we're at least a week, probably 2 weeks out. Now we're coming up on that pretty quick. So, we'll need to evaluate that, but I would defer to my comms team to determine their comfort level as to how much notice and time is necessary to kind of permeate the ridership that's out there right now and make sure they're prepared and know when it's going to happen. So we would certainly make the decision and we would say, okay, we're a week or two out at this point, we're going to be good to go. Let's activate our communications plan on this and go from there.
Okay, thanks.
That may be another valid addition to Jim's point about whether March 1 should necessarily even be a part of your consider action. If you were just to maybe consider saying that it's as soon as it's ready and available to immediately move forward.
Well, let me just add, I think not as much immediate move forward, but upon, a set amount of days, either 2 weeks or 21 days or something notice, so the general public doesn't get stuck with fares where they weren't anticipating fares.
Totally makes sense. And I support that.
And I have noticed some actually that some of our Dash passengers, because WMATA has begun collecting fares again, that folks are beginning to go to the front door because they've become used to boarding and having to pay fares, and our drivers are directing them to the rear door. It seems that at least anecdotally, that adoption on WMATA has been fairly smooth transition to re-implementing fares, but whether there are any lessons learned there, certainly I know Josh that you have a good relationship with the general manager WMATA, so hopefully there are things that communication about sort of what their experience has been that we can learn from here as well. I could go either way on the date, including it or not. I think it is helpful, and I think consistent with some of the other conversations we'd had about that March timeframe when we had talked about this back in January, but it also kind of, once we pass this, it also puts passengers on notice that this is coming around this time because, as our meetings are public and these records available. And so I think it helps to get people prepared for that transition. But certainly if it, is it all confusing or we're coming in far behind that because of the supply issues on the back end, that's, then, it doesn't make sense to have that, but then we end up going, weeks or more than a month later. And I do see, I did want, Jim Durham had put a couple of mentions of his volunteers at the vaccination sites and mentions that he's seen a number of our Dash drivers getting vaccinated, and had a kudos from Natalie at the health department, who said that Dash has been very forward thinking how they're addressing a lot of these issues. So just wanted to draw everyone's attention to that kudos that's there in the chat.
Thank you. And I would just point out relative to the chat that we'll be publishing the chat transcripts with the meeting materials on their website. So if there's anybody who's watching who isn't able to see that, that information will be publicly available as well.
Josh, this is Steve. I'd just like to make sure that the issue that Matt raised is reinforced here, and that we do have an established period of time that we're going to use to prepare our ridership, that the fares are now going to be instituted, and you have the flexibility and comfort level to have that ability to do so when you're ready, and not just be held to this March 1st term, but to manage the message properly to our customer base. I think it's important that we establish at least a time frame to get them brought up to speed in the event they need to get a monthly pass that they would normally not have, that they could access that or put money on their fare card, and just don't give them a short period of time to react to the change, albeit others are charging a fare. More concerned about the Dash audience here.
Thank you. So yeah, certainly I provided some conceptual language to help you all. I don't have, this as a board action. It is entirely your discretion of anyone who wishes to, and the chairman, of course, you may choose to take this matter up as an action item. I certainly am more than happy with a 2-week minimum, being included as a part of the directive, and certainly support that.
So I'd ask if anyone wants to put a motion on the table.
I guess I could take a stab at it. I move that the ATC Board of Directors work with staff to come up with an appropriate lead time to re-implement the fares in order, strike the in order, of the fares with enough notice so that our customers have advanced time to put sufficient funds on their passes or fare cards. Not the most elegantly drafted motion, but.
Hey, Matt, it's Jim. Can I maybe propose, I think all you're trying to do there is to amend what Josh proposed by adding language that includes that 2-week notice period for customers. Is that for writers? Is that right? Or am I?
Are we good with 2 weeks? I just, I don't know. If 2 weeks is good, that's good. Okay. Okay.
I expect that it would, because if someone needs to have their fare car updated, after a certain period of time, it's no longer valid. Mine may no longer be valid for that matter. But at least it gives people reasonable time to go to the metro station, make sure that the card's activated, put fare on, or get a access card. So perhaps as we shape the item here, just that there's, if we feel comfortable with a 2-week time, establish a 2-week advance notification to the riders of the implementation of fares, and sort of make it a little, tighten it up a bit.
Okay, I accept the amendment, provided that staff can get notification out and onto the buses in that amount of time. Is it something that can just be turned around quickly?
Yeah, is 2 weeks enough, Josh? Or again, the important thing is to manage the message, not necessarily hold ourselves to a time period here. So if you think 2 weeks is adequate, it may be good to go with that. But if you need more time, you're the transportation professional here, so we're relying on you to say what's practical with your maintenance team and your comms team to package this together to properly manage the message to our customers.
I was just going to offer to Whitney to speak to that, but she sent me an internal message that just popped up on one of the 16 windows that's on my screen right now, and she said that 2 weeks is adequate for their team. So I would just offer, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to offer, if Mr. Harris might restate his motion for Beth so that she's able to capture it for the record properly.
Sure. I move that the ATC Board of Directors direct staff to reinstate fare collection on all dash bus routes at a time no less than 2 weeks upon fleet readiness for such action. That would be the extent of my motion.
Board Secretary have the motion that's on the table?
Second.
Okay, we've got it moved and seconded, but I just want to make sure that Board Secretary has the motion.
Yes, David, I've got it. Thank you.
Okay. Are we all, is there further discussion or any amendments to the motion that's on the table?
I would just only ask whether that formulation works for Josh and his team, whether that's clear enough. I am fine with it, I think, but I want to make sure that it works.
Yeah, we can certainly roll with it. the key here is that it's 2 weeks as soon as it's feasible. Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, I will ask all in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, carries unanimously.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That concludes my report.
All right, we'll go ahead with recognize Evan.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Evan Davis, Director of Finance. My report begins on page 10 of the packet, and I'll keep it pretty brief. Really, nothing has changed in the big picture scenario since I spoke with you last month. The key progress that happened in December is with great help from the Office of Management and Budget and the Finance Department at the city. We did transfer roughly 2.5 million of the CARES 1 funds over to the DASH part of the city's accounts. So that has moved us into a monthly surplus of just over $2 million and a year-to-date deficit of just over $100,000. In January, we have finally appropriated the amounts related to the grants for the enhanced service funded by I-395 Commuter Choice on the AT1 Plus and the AT9. And we're able to move all those expenses for those services over to those proper accounts. So that put together, that really puts our books where they're supposed to be. And you'll see that on next month's report when we're now in a surplus situation. We are there already. It's just not on the books as of December 31st. With the GM's, the discussion that you just had and the decision that you made regarding fair collection, we do anticipate using about 4.7 million in total of the CARES 1 funds in fiscal 21. And that's going to ensure that we end the year even and are able to maintain all the service pattern that we have at this time. I would, next slide, please. I'll just point out, and Chris really covered this earlier in the TNES report, this law that was passed in December around New Year's has gotten a longer name. CRISA is the acronym. The shorthand seems to be CARES 2. So WMATA is getting its piece. The WMATA board needs to approve the allocation to the local transit providers. Alexandria is looking like it's going to get about $5 million out of that. I can say, not to get ahead of the city manager's proposed budget, which will happen on Tuesday, the 16th, that we're working very closely with the city, with the budget office, with finance, and with TNES to find the best way to use those funds to maintain both WMATA and DASH service in fiscal 22, and that this funding will definitely help us do that. So that's really at a big picture where we're at. The report's on pages 11 through 13. I'm happy to entertain any questions you have.
Other questions for Evan?
Somebody's typing and not on mute. Go on mute for typing, please.
Is there any word on CARES 3?
So the Biden administration has introduced its 1.9 was a $1 trillion package, and you know the House has passed its budget reconciliation bill. So I think we're following that closely, along with all the major associations. APTA, the American Public Transportation Association, is following that closely. So we'll see what happens. It certainly, I believe it includes somewhere between 20 and 30 billion for transit. So that would be additional funds coming down the road if legislation that looks like that is ultimately passed. Thank you all very much.
All right, thank you, Evan. We'll move ahead with Martin, who's going to present on two information items tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, members of the board. First item I have, item 6A, is on page 14. It's just a quarterly ridership update for the new members of the board. Staff, we typically provide a ridership update every 3 months to show kind of a detailed picture of what our ridership is doing on a route by route and day by day basis. Josh, can you advance the slides, or? Yeah, thank you. You see a snapshot of the weekday picture here. I'm not intending to go into any detail on this, but I did want to offer a couple caveats. One is that you're seeing some major decreases, obviously, due to COVID. Some of that is also attributable to the fact that we're running significantly reduced service on some of these routes. So I just want to be clear on that. Obviously, demand is down, but service levels also are down, which is contributing to some of the decreases that you see. The other comment I had is that we provide the bottom row offers the total ridership without the King Street trolley. The trolley often skews our data because it comprises so much of our ridership. It's about 15 to 20% of our overall ridership on weekdays, and then about half of our ridership on weekends. So if you take the trolley data out and just look at the regular blue and yellow dash buses, you see that we're down by about 50% on weekdays. But then on weekends, we're only down by about 20% or so. So weekend ridership has not gone down by nearly as much as weekday ridership. Are there any questions on the ridership? Okay, I will move on to item 6B. Next slide, please. So item 6B is on page 15 of your packet. Couple things with this. This is a final update and preview for our FY22 TDP. You see our schedule here for the next couple of months. Next 3 months, we'll all have TDP/budget related actions, or not actions, but items for the board. Next month will be kind of the formal kickoff of our FY22 TDP outreach process. I'll be presenting the draft FY22 TDP to the board for some initial feedback and comments. Then in April, we'll have our public hearing, which is part of the larger 2-month public comment process. There'll be a lot of virtual meetings and outreach that we'll be doing to get feedback and input from the community. And then staff will be revising the TDP based on public feedback and board guidance after the April meeting. And then we'll come back in May to present the final TDP and budget for FY22 in hopes that we would receive board adoption at that point. And then obviously the fiscal year starts at the beginning of July. One important scheduling note as it relates to the launch of the new Dash network. We had originally intended to launch the new network on June 27th. We are now looking at September 5th as the actual launch date. The reason for that change is that we are sort of at the mercy of WMATA and their service change schedule for this network change. Because of some of the route swaps that are going on in West Alexandria, we have to make sure we change our service the exact same day that they change their service. And they have moved their service date from June 27th to September 5th due to some other considerations outside of our control. So that's our target date, September 5th. Gives us a couple extra months to get ready for the network launch. So that's a good thing, but obviously we're anxious to get it going. Any questions on the slide or kind of what to expect over the next couple months? Okay, great. Next slide, please. So the last thing I wanted to provide is just one final kind of preview or update on the FY20 TDP. So you would be able to go in next month kind of knowing at least to some degree what to expect. Most of the information is provided in your packet. I provided kind of an overview, some reminders of what the new Dash network includes. As Evan noted, we're still waiting for final budget guidance from the city. We're expecting that within the next week or so. But we're anticipating that we will not get the supplemental request for the full 2022 ATV plan, which was an additional $3.5 million. That would have allowed us to implement the full plan. So we're not able to do that. What we are seeing now as the best case scenario would be a current services ATV plan or new Dash network where we would have the same number of revenue hours and platform hours as we did in FY22-21 budgeted, and that would just be replicated in FY22, and we would have to shift those hours around and reallocate them based on the new network. So that's kind of what we're assuming is the best case scenario right now. Kind of two things I wanted to accomplish tonight. First, one is to kind of over the next couple of months, I think we're gonna have a lot of discussion about kind of the different intricacies of the network. We'll get into the weeds a little bit. A lot of it will be kind of, concerns that we want to hear from the community, and we'll try to address those. So there will be a lot of focus on some of the, less positive aspects. I want to make sure we don't lose sight of the overall positive aspect of this network and what we're doing. This is really a generational opportunity for us to improve mobility in the city, to maybe even a cultural shift for the city in how they view transit and its relevance to their daily lives. I really believe that, you have some stats in your in your packet, you've seen before about the amount of access that this will increase for various groups in the city. And we're really excited about that. We think that this will not only increase their access to transit, but by virtue of that, their access to jobs, to educational opportunities, and to healthcare and all of the above. So I really want to just stress the really positive aspects overall that we're going to be seeing with this plan, even with the current services version. You know, I think we'll still be able to realize a lot of those benefits. So that being said, the second part of what I wanted to stress tonight is just to be very transparent that you know, even though in the best case scenario, if we were to avoid any sort of subsidy reduction, even in that scenario, we still are going to have you know, some areas that may see less service than what they have today, just by virtue of the hours that are being shifted around to different routes under the new network. So my the packet information that I provided is kind of geared towards that, kind of focusing on not the reductions that are included in the final ATV plan. You know, we had some concerns that we litigated back in 2019 for our full ATV plan. Certainly those concerns we'll probably hear about those, but I just wanted to stress that in addition to those, since we're not doing the full 2022 plan, we're actually doing the current services, there'll be some additional reductions that are actually less than what current pre-COVID service levels were. So I've tried to highlight those just so you have those and you have some awareness of those. And then I guess the last bullet I have here is just the 395 commuter choice program. That will make a huge difference in our ability to implement some of the major improvements in this network, particularly as it relates to line 35 and 36 in the West End and Northern Alexandria. So just wanted to highlight those. And I guess it would also probably be helpful if I just really briefly talked about some of the comments that we received at the start of the meeting. The one comment we heard was about the AT2 and Seminary and Janney's Lane. You know, we're still obviously waiting for final budget guidance from the city. Once we receive that, we'll have a better idea. I think some of the signs we've seen have been more positive of late. You know, we would only really have to look at a lot of those cuts if it was a kind of a worst case scenario. So I think we're hopeful that we'll be able to avoid those, but again, we're having to wait until we get final guidance from the city. Evan, am I anything you want to add on that?
Right on. Yeah, I would underline we've seen positive signs. Okay.
And then the other one was the question about the Park Place. I think that there's going to be a very classic, straightforward outreach situation where we have kind of two options or how we could align this particular route. We could either route it one way or route it the other way. And I think we're going to submit that to the community and see what feedback we get to kind of to guide our decision on that. The one note I would make is that the particular route that we're talking about, line 36, we have applied for additional funding through 395 commuter choice. And if we get that funding, which we are optimistic that we will, that may help us add more service to the route such that we can split the service between the two different corridors, which might be kind of the compromise that would help everybody out. So more info to come on that next month, but I just wanted to highlight a few of those items for the board to be aware of. Happy to take any questions at this point.
Well, Martin, I'll go ahead and ask one. So, you know, first of all, I was smiling earlier as you and Evan were talking about the positive signs coming from the city, and that is about our budget. We don't know yet because the budget's not out, but that is, you know, we know that we looked at some pretty bleak scenarios just a couple of months ago, and so you know, we know that this is a city that is very encouraging and supportive of its transit, and so that you know, the signs that are you know, as we're starting to prepare for the budget to be released, we do need to celebrate if we do in fact end up being made whole. That would be no small feat on the part of the city, and so you know, next month we'll know for sure where we stand. But I'm encouraged by that. I do want to, you know, there had been some advocacy from, you know, folks within the community, and I know Jim Durham is with us tonight. He had sent a letter on behalf of Grassroots Alexandria nonprofit to the city manager, actually making the case for fully funding the ATV, which may not be possible given fiscal constraints. And we're starting to hear from segments of the community who are concerned about some of the changes that would be required if we do a cost neutral ATV. And I want to make sure that we can be transparent with the community about what would be some of the costs associated with individual segments, so folks understand not only one, how these things were prioritized as we looked at cost neutral versus the full ATV and had to come up with bridging that gap. But then as we look at pieces of that, what would it cost to bring that back? Because I think it's going to be important for council to understand that when they deliberate on our budget, and important for the community to understand, what are some of the trade-offs that we made. And I think, getting to your slide that you had in the information in the board packet, there are pieces of, say, some of the commuter service, and we heard that from the mayor last night, where communities, as people start to go back to work, may be concerned that that service is going to look different or be a little less frequent than it is now. But we want to allow folks to be able to advocate for service that they believe in.
Yeah, so I think as part of the TDP document and as part of the outreach, we'll try to highlight some of those kind of in the same way that I've done that in the packet. And as part of that, we can try to. Would you be looking for a specific cost information for each one as well? So
I think we would need to have that information because, I mean, folks, transit is something that often is a little parochial in that you kind of look for, you may be concerned about your segment or your neighborhood as well as the overall network and connectivity within the city. But I think it's important for folks to understand, why were some of these trade-offs made, and if we, if folks wanted to pursue getting money restored, what would be involved in that, so that way they can plan for their advocacy, and also for us to understand, this document is, we passed what the overall vision was, but as we implement the network, we may find that, as we're getting more information through the
Chairman, I lost your audio there. Just the last 10 seconds.
Yeah, his phone audio dropped off for some reason.
Well, he's working on that. I think we could probably put together a table kind of similar to some of the tables that we've. Oh.
I think I have on my phone. I rejoin the meeting. I think my phone threw me out for a moment, so hopefully you can hear me, and I'm able to hear your response.
Okay, great, thank you.
Martin, we hear you, David. Go ahead.
Okay, yes, I was just going to say that we can absolutely put together a similar table to some of the ones that we've shown the board in the last couple of months, and try to sort of prioritize how we got down from the full ATV plan down to the kind of the current services, so that if we want to look at changing our approach on that through the outreach process, we can have that information available. Any other questions or comments?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you want to talk at all about this map here, Martin?
No, this is a map that the board has seen before. Yeah, so I don't have any updates to it.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Well, David, if you can hear us, I'm not seeing any signs from any other board members. Perhaps Steve, would you like to carry it forward?
Yeah, it sounds like we've lost David, but we've reached the end of the agenda. I'll ask if there's any additional items that any of the board members would like to raise before moving towards
I am here on my phone, if you can hear me.
Oh, you are, okay.
There he is.
Turn it back over to
I
David.
had to leave on the laptop, but I'm on the phone, and hopefully it's not delayed too much. Yeah, we've gotten to the end of the agenda, so I think it's just to announce that our next board meeting is March 10th at 5:30 p.m., still being held virtually. And I'll call for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Motion to adjourn the meeting?
Second.
Second, was that, I couldn't see who that was.
Jim.
Jim, okay. Second by Jim. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, meeting's adjourned. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good evening and
Thank
stay
you.
safe.
Evening.
Take care.
Thank
Stay
you.
safe.
Evening.
Stay safe. all.
Bye-bye.